The situation is that we have a government in Greece that is very precarious, and although it is a government committed to continuing with the old economic policies, it is not a government that is going to last very long. My fear is that we may end up with a Greece that still defaults all its debts and gets out of the Eurozone by the end of this year. Ostensibly, the Greek elections have turned up the best possible way. We have the possibility of a government that would include New Democracy, the centre-right party, together with the centre-left PASOK. And there is a possibility that the coalition will be enlarged. So in technical terms, we have a government, a Greek government, which remains committed to the austerity package and to the measures that should put Greece back on its feet one day. In purely political terms, therefore, Greece has avoided a very major problem. It could have defaulted by the end of this week if extremist left-wing parties had the upper hand. So it's easy to understand why European governments, which only over the weekend were preparing a lot of contingency plans for a bank panic in Europe, are now feeling relieved and are welcoming the Greek result. Seldom before had a country responsible for only 2% of Europe's overall economy attracted so much international attention as Greece has done in the last few days. However, a closer look at the Greek situation would indicate that very little has changed. The reality is that the only reason that the New Democracy Party is able to form a coalition is because of a quirk of the Greek electoral system, which awards 50 seats automatically to the party that comes first in the elections. Indeed, overall, the number of people who rejected the European Union bailouts is slightly higher than the number of people who approved for these European Union bailouts. So the situation is that we have a government in Greece that is very precarious, and although it is a government committed to continuing with the old economic policies, it is not a government that is going to last very long. My fear is that we may end up with a Greece that still defaults all its debts and gets out of the Eurozone by the end of this year. Clearly, the problem is no longer just Greece. The problem with Greece, and should Greece be evicted or depart from the Eurozone, is the impact this will have on other countries. No longer would Europe be able to claim that it stands by all its countries and it offers them equal protection. Secondly, any departure of Greece is likely to be followed by a wrenching internal political change in Greece itself. There can hardly be a less stable region of Europe than the Balkans region, which only a decade ago was facing a prolonged civil war. Now, one doesn't need to believe in domino theories, one doesn't need to believe that Greece will infect all the neighbors, but one just needs to look at the borders in Europe, at the increased migration pressures that are on Greece, at the inability of the Greek state to clamp down on organized crime at the moment, to see that any eviction of Greece from the Eurozone will have fundamental implications on the security in Southeast Europe. And ultimately, that's also a question of credibility, a question of the reputation. There would be a feeling throughout the former communist East, but especially in the Balkans, that somehow yet again a division line is opening up between the so-called old Europe of Western countries, which may remain within the Eurozone, and new Europe, which either are evicted or never admitted into the Eurozone. In fact, all the European project, the entire project of a united continent, started half a century ago, reaffirmed 20 years ago when communism collapsed, is now being questioned. It's very difficult to see how the Eurozone will break out completely as long as the biggest country in the Eurozone, namely Germany, continues to believe in the single currency. But it's equally difficult to see how all the 17 countries which are members of the Euro could remain in the Euro by the end of this crisis. The key question for European leaders will be to watch and see whether this crisis somehow stops or whether it moves to the next country, as it has done in the past. And the next country, unfortunately, is a country that is simply too big to be saved, and therefore would probably, if it is infected by the crisis, mean the end of the euro as we know it, and that's Italy. Everyone continues to claim that Italy should not be affected, that it's got nothing to do with the crisis in other countries, but then every time a crisis occurred in one country, everyone said that this is the last crisis until the next one came along. It's difficult to see whether Italy will be affected, but clearly the markets are nervous, and the elementary basic thing which European leaders should have done, which is to get hold of this crisis, to try somehow to run the markets rather than the financial markets running them, they failed abysmally. It is the financial markets which dictate policy, not the other way around.